The proclamation of the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus heard of the death of John the Baptist, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. The crowds heard of this and followed him on foot from their towns. When he disembarked and saw the vast crowd, his heart was moved with pity for them, and he cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples approached him and said, "This is a deserted place, and it is already late. Dismiss the crowd so that they can go to the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "There is no need for them to go away. Give them some food yourselves." But they said to him, "5 loaves and 2 fish are all we have here." Then he said, "Bring them here to me." And he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he said the blessing, broke the loaves, and gave them to the disciples, who in turn gave them to the crowds. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up the fragments left over, 12 wicker baskets full. Those who ate were about 5,000 men, not counting women and children. The Gospel of the Lord.
Our Gospel for this Sunday comes from the 14th chapter of St. Matthew. We want to develop the same line of thought that we have been developing in our reflection on the first 2 readings. We have 2 levels of wisdom. Human, worldly wisdom that tells us in the first reading that if you don't have money, you have nothing to eat, nothing to drink. But there is the logic of God's love and compassion, so that those who have nothing can still come to God and be fed. But it is not just ordinary food. It is the word of life that we must listen to. It is the covenant of love that we must eat so that we can enjoy the benefits of God's blessing. In the second reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans, St. Paul lines up different trials, persecutions, nakedness, the sword, and if we use ordinary human wisdom, we say, "Oh, what a life. I'm out of this. I give up. I don't want to live anymore. I don't believe in God. I will separate myself from the world." But St. Paul says there is another level of wisdom, the love of God shown to us in Jesus. And when we operate from that logic of love poured into our hearts, then we are more than conquerors. You will not be defeated by the severest tests that come our way. You will triumph over these things because of the love of God in Jesus Christ. Now in the Gospel, we find Jesus manifesting in a narrative form the triumph of the wisdom of compassion and love. John the Baptist has just been executed, and this must have cost Jesus so much distress. And so the Gospel passage for today opens with Jesus going to the wilderness to be by himself. Of course, we know that this is a habit of Jesus, to pray. But as a human being, maybe Jesus was hurting, was grieving. That's why he wanted to be alone in the wilderness, to reflect on this horrible event in the life of his relative and friend, the one who baptized him, the one who prepared many people for his coming, John the Baptist. Now, that is understandable when we use the logic of the world. But when people heard that Jesus had left, they followed him, bringing the sick to them. And Jesus saw them. What did he do? With a heart filled with compassion, he abandoned his rest. He abandoned his isolation. He abandoned his grief, which the world will probably excuse him for indulging in. But operating from the logic of love and compassion, he got out of himself. He opened himself to the needs of others. He addressed their needs. He made them more important than himself. The compassion and love of the shepherd. Of course, people will tell him, "Oh, Jesus, hide. You deserve a rest. You deserve silence after going through that harrowing experience. You need to be alone." Yes, and there's nothing bad about it. But Jesus is operating from the logic of love and compassion. And now, the disciples, seeing that this vast crowd were staying quite long and it was becoming dark already, again, used human wisdom. They told Jesus, "Well, we better send these people home. It is getting dark and they can look for food for themselves." Very wise, humanly speaking. That's practical. If you have 5,000 men, not counting the women and the children, and you are in a faraway place, and if you are one of the friends of Jesus, I would say the same things. Yes, we better let them go while they can still find a way. And if before it turns dark, let them on the way find food for themselves. That is human acceptable wisdom. But here, Jesus, using another type of wisdom, the wisdom of love and compassion, said, "No, that's not needed. You give them something to eat." Wow. Humanly speaking, you say, "Oh, my boss, he's crazy." And true enough, they again reported to Jesus that that was humanly impossible, for they had only 5 loaves and 2 fish. Yeah, human wisdom, no matter what you do, is quite rational in saying, how can you feed more than 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish? Yeah. But then Jesus elevates the discussion to another level, the level of compassion and love. Trust in the loving God. Trust not in 5 loaves alone and 2 fish. Trust in the God of love and compassion. Give me the meager resources that you have. And Jesus took them in his hands, looked up to heaven, meaning he recognized that these poor offerings came from God. They are God's offering to be signs of God's love and compassion. And he blessed God, meaning he thanked God. He recognized that God is the gracious God, and God can turn these meager gifts into something marvelous. And then he handed these 5 loaves and 2 fish to the disciples to be distributed. An act of sharing, love, compassion to those who have nothing. So Jesus shows them, trust in God. God is love. God is compassion. And be the hands of God in sharing the meager resources. Make them not the offerings of the poor, but make them offerings of love and compassion. And the miracle happened. Sometimes, miracles do not happen because we are clinging to human wisdom. We do not trust enough in the wisdom of God. the wisdom that is humanly impossible, where love and compassion can turn meager gifts into something that is not only enough, but overflowing. It cannot be produced by the world. It can only be produced by the God who looks at the needy and whose heart is touched and can turn gifts, especially of the poor, into a marvelous banquet where everyone will have his or her fill and there will be more that is left. Maybe the hungers of the world, the hunger of the Filipino nation, could be remedied if only we shift mentalities from mere human conventional wisdom to the wisdom of love, compassion, and trust in God. Today is the feast of Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Society of Jesus. He was very much a man of the world, a man enamored with conquest, military conquest, until God intervened in his life. And that intervention led him to a different way of understanding the world, life, creation. From a worldly way of looking at the world, to be possessed, to be conquered, he started seeing the work of God. A world charged with the love of God and human life as well. And we know the transformation. He became poor. He became obedient. He put himself and the whole society of Jesus into the hands of God and the successor of Peter the Pope, being totally available, making their poor selves, their 5 loaves and 2 fish, available for the kingdom of God. The prayer of Saint Ignatius captures it all. The world will not understand this prayer if you use worldly wisdom, but for those who have discovered the love of God, you will know that this prayer is true. Take and receive, O Lord, my liberty, my mind, my memory. Everything I surrender to you. Just give me your love. That's enough for me. With love, you conquer everything. The word has been exposed. Let us now fulfill it.